Wel, croeso I bawb i'r Ffotogallery. Welcome to you all to the Ffotogallery. Oes na rhywun sy'n siarad Cymraeg yma? You're welcome to ask a question in whatever language you feel comfortable. But it's going to be an informal talk about my work, and feel free to ask questions. And also, after I've gone around the exhibition, if you want to come up to me and just have a chat or have any personal queries about images, then just come along. There'll be plenty of chance to do that. So where do we start? First of all, perhaps the first thing I should say is to thank the Ffotogallery for the privilege of showing my work here. For those of you who weren't in the opening, I was one of a small group of people who got together to set up the Ffotogallery way back in 1978. I was at the time living down in Newport, and little did I think in those early days when I was painting the walls of the first gallery in Charles Street that I myself would be exhibiting here all these years later. And when we set up the Ffotogallery, it wasn't really about promoting our own work, it was about promoting photography in Wales and having a gallery and a space that people could visit in Cardiff to discuss photography and obviously to show work as well. So perhaps the starting point after that would be, how did it all start? I've got, looking back, when you reach a certain age, you look back on things in your life that might have influenced you. And I do remember, as a very small child, going up to the attic in our home in Aberystwyth and being afraid of going through the door. I can still remember holding the knob of the door, afraid to go in because I knew it was going to be a very dark space, because my father was a very keen amateur photographer, and occasionally he would turn an attic room, which we called room cowdell. Men there will know what a room cowdell is. It is a junk room. He would turn that into a dark room, and he had a little enlarger. But I do remember then deciding, right, I'm going to go in this time. And going into the room, there was a little red light in the ceiling, and I remember seeing a dish of some what appeared to be water with a plain bit of paper in it. And suddenly my father was shaking this dish and an image appeared. A photograph appeared on that paper, and it was like magic, especially for a little child. And many years later, when I started being serious about photography, and I would be in the dark room printing an image, I think those of you who have worked in a dark room, when you know that you've got a fairly good picture and it's appearing on that paper, that memory would come back, and that thrill of seeing a picture appearing, that's never left me. Digital is not quite the same. But so that's how it started. And then, but I didn't really take a lot of, the first photo I ever took was when I was 10 years old. And it's in that little book of 60, the previous retrospective that I had 10 years ago in the National Library in Aberystwyth. I produced a little book, and it's on the shelf there. And that is the first image in that book, where as a 10-year-old little girl, I decided I wanted to take a picture. My father had the camera, and we were in Flanders, in Bredin, and it was photos of candles in a cave. So that was quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge for a small child to stand still, because the exposure was 30 seconds. And my father helped me to put the camera on a wall. So that is and my father's kept the picture in a diary. I was privileged as a child. For a few years, my father bought a caravan and we would travel around Europe for the whole of the summer holiday. And I'm sure that influenced my outlook on the world as well. As a small child, being introduced to different countries, different languages, meeting other children, and also the visual influences of those countries. So that's the earliest picture I took. Then there was a gap. I didn't really take, I took a few snaps as a teenager. And so we come to the earliest photos in the exhibition. I was a pupil at Ysgol Ramadeg Ardwyn or Ardwyn Grammar School in Aberystwyth. And the school was very proud of its academic tradition and people who'd gone on to study various subjects. And so as pupils, we were really pushed to try and get into universities and to follow an academic career. And I think it was an act of defiance on my part that I decided to refuse to fill in a university application form. I was passionately interested in literature and poetry, but I decided that art was my favourite subject and decided I wanted to go to art college. And in those days, I think there wasn't a lot of respect for people who wanted to follow vocational courses or went to art colleges. People said, oh yes, well, if you can't get into university, go to art college. It was that kind of background I came from. But my parents were behind me all the way. They said, it's your life, you decide what you want to do with it. And I'm eternally grateful for their support. So I ended up in Cardiff. I came to Cardiff to go on a foundation course and loved it, absolutely loved it. And of course we were introduced to all various media, and one of those was photography. And we had a 2-week introduction to photography. And so that's the first, my introduction. Then I decided, because of my interest in literature and poetry, I thought, well, why don't and I really liked graphic images. I decided I wanted to study graphic design and went to Newport to study graphic design. But when I was there, I think I arrived the same year as David Hearn set up the documentary photography school. And so I would go into their lectures in the lecture theatre every Wednesday morning, if I remember, and suddenly was just so impressed, was introduced to all the great photographers and discussions about photography, and saw the medium as something that, a powerful medium that I wanted to explore. And so the early photos here really show my response as a young student, a young person from a very different background. Believe it or not, when I came down to Cardiff, I thought it was a huge place because I was coming from Aberystwyth. It was a university town, but I had links also with my father was from a local village, a Blaenplwyf, and so my background really was quite a rural one, although I was brought up in Aberystwyth itself. And so it was a shock for me to come to Cardiff and Newport. The two cities were going through a process of redevelopment, and I was quite shocked to walk along these streets with blocked up windows. And I could sense that somehow communities were being scattered as they were demolishing the houses. And so I would spend my time wandering these. I was a very shy person, and didn't have the confidence really to approach people and photograph people. So I spent the first couple of years just exploring the medium and developing my skills in composition in photography. So these are just examples. There's one from Cardiff, that is the earliest one, the top one there. And then these are also linked. These are from a project I did when I was in Newport. And this is done in my spare time really, because I did have, it wasn't a project I was given. I was studying graphic design, but all these were done in my own time, and I developed a whole series of these windows. And one thing I wanted in the exhibition was to actually, these are the actual prints that were in my degree show in 1976. And I'm showed them because I'm really proud of the fact that they're still in good condition, but also to emphasize to young photographers how important it is to keep your work safely. And with digital as well, you know, this, unless you're backing up and everything, things can get lost. Because I didn't think that when I took these that I would be showing them, you know, 48 years later or whatever. So yeah, so as I said, these are the exact photos that were in that exhibition. These, although I wasn't taking photos of people, when I was wandering around these streets, I was like a Pied Piper, because kids and children would follow me and say, take a photo of us. And the only way I could have peace and quiet to take the photos I wanted, which was these kind of images, was to, oh, come on then, okay, I'll take a photo of you. And this one, I don't, you know, I didn't actually tell them how to pose there, but they just got together, jumped on this window, and immediately sort of presented themselves. So, and they didn't want to, of course, they couldn't see the pictures. These days, you could show the digital file. But once I'd taken the picture, they were happy, and I could carry on with my work. So those are the earliest photos. After Newport then, I decided I wanted to explore this medium and spend more time working with photography, and was fortunate in having a place in Birmingham, what was then Polytechnic. Although it was under the graphic design department, I was based in the photography school up in Dorrington Road, and my Callet was the director of the photography school there. And I went there and presented a proposal to document a rural area in Ceredigion. I could see that a lot of work was being done in South Wales valleys, partly because of the location of the documentary school. But I couldn't see similar work being done in North Wales and in traditional rural areas, Welsh-speaking, the heartland of Welsh-speaking Wales. And so I chose, after exploring different areas, the Mynydd Bach area, which is not far from where I live. And I wanted really to document life there, the society there, the culture of that area. It was an area like Cardiff and Newport were going through huge changes. Then Mynydd Bach and similar areas were going through also a change, as it was getting impossible to earn a living off the land. And so people were moving away, young people were moving away. Empty houses were coming available. They were very attractive as second homes, as holiday homes, or for people seeking a better life, people moving from the cities. And so it's going through a huge demographic change. And I'm so proud of the fact, really, that I chose that area, because it records a way of life that was changing and was disappearing. When I was photographing in the Mynydd Bach area, I then went back to the early tithe maps and marked out an exact square mile. For those who speak Welsh, dan ni'n sôn am y filltir sgwar, and we talk about the square mile, or the filltir sgwar is a term that was first used by the author D.J. Williams, and it defines and describes the community, or where, you know, sort of communities, and the sort of really these small communities that were in the Welsh language heartland, and the close communities that existed there. So I took the literal meaning of the filltir sgwar, And within that square mile, on the tithe map, I marked every place that was a place name. Some of the houses were ruins. Some still had the older generation of people living there. They were the farmhouses hadn't changed a lot in many years, and so this is from that square mile project. At the time, within that square mile, there was a school, there were 2 shops, and a chapel. And within a few years of my finishing the project, they had all closed. And so I've recorded really the changes that occurred there. So this is, I would wander around, and very often they would be very remote farmhouses. And it would take a long time because I would knock the door, get to know the people, and always I'd have to have tea and cake. I put on a lot of weight. But I was welcomed there. What was wonderful about it, no one questioned me. I think these days, possibly, if you went to somebody's house and said, "Can I come and take your photo, please? And can I photograph your house?" And they'd probably say, "Why do you want to?" You know. But they welcomed me with open arms, and I got to know some wonderful people. This is an interior of Bwthyn Cofadel. There is I haven't got in the exhibition, but 30 years later I returned and documented the same place again. And I have got a double image where you can see the changes in the interiors. This is a felin in Llangwrifon, where Dafydd Ifans lived. And what I like about that image and what attracted me, I remember somebody looking at that picture and say, "Oh, why didn't you move that tin out of the way? It spoils the picture." But it's a documentary image, and in many ways, that biscuit tin and this paper cutting here, possibly of Selwyn Thomas, who'd been well known to Welsh-speaking people, the only clue to when that picture was taken, because if you took those out, then it could have been taken 30, 50 years earlier. And so that, in my view, is the distinction between a documentary photograph and creating a beautiful image. Then this photo is this of Thomas Ifans Penllwyn Bedw, Twm they called him. And this, I was quite young when I took this. Obviously I was doing my MA. And it's one of the photos probably I'm really most proud of. I never tire of looking at this image. It's on my studio wall. And Thomas Ifans was a very shy person. And I'd been travelling up and down this little lane to go up to Trefenter. He lived just in Llangwrifon, a little village below. And I'd noticed this person chopping wood and carrying things or working in the garden. And I thought, and of course I was a shy person as well. I decided one day I really should approach him and ask if I could photograph him. Knowing he was a shy person, I chose a March morning when I knew the sun would be on his front door. And I did something I very rarely do. I knocked on the door and I immediately lifted the camera up. And so when he opened the door, I just took a couple of pictures and he was sort of looking out. And then, of course, I took the camera down and said, introduced myself and asked him, "Are you happy that I'm photographing you?" And we had a wonderful chat. And I only took about 5 images. That was, I think, the second one I took. And but there's something, I think it's quite symbolic of the period, really. It's an end of an era. I also see it as an image. One eye is looking towards the future and is alive and a lot of light in it. And the other one seems to be sort of in the past. And in my view, it sort of symbolises that stepping from one period to another. And anyway, if you go on here then, I would obviously record the farming calendar. And things have changed a lot. This is one of the little farms was Bryn Golau, And again, I would call and chat with them, and they said, oh, well, we're going to be killing the geese for Christmas. And although there's only a small section of the images here, the community came together. It was a sort of this sort of helping each other. The people from the nearby farms would congregate, and this shows the process of killing the geese. And what I had never seen before was that you might see there's an image of them ironing the goose. And they do that because it then loosens it makes it easier to pull the feathers out. And of course I'm interested in books as well. I'll go on to that later. But there's something quite nice about the intimacy of having small images within a book or sort of this kind of scale. And this is just a landscape of a typical kind of landscape of the area, where you've got little cottages, and that's in Trefenter, Penbryn Mawr in Trefenter. And so that was to represent the kind of landscape that I was working in. So we can start moving now, and when it came to the presentation of the work that I'd done within a period of 18 months, to be fair, I think it was probably 12 months that I was in Mynydbach itself, for the whole project was over 18 months. In the meantime, as part of my MA, I'd also been visiting photographic galleries that were being set up in the UK in this period, as part of deciding how to present work in a gallery space. And I think, as the text here said, I visited Half Moon Gallery in the East End in London and met Joe Spence and the group there. And they had started producing, they were working with documentary projects. And instead of framing them and putting them on the wall in a gallery, had started mounting them on laminated sheets and then rolling them up and sending them to all kinds of places like schools and, sort of village halls, so that you're not talking about a select place like a gallery, so they could be exhibited anywhere really. And so that was the decision I made then, that the panels in the exhibition, there are two, these are again from the MA show, the original panels. I created an exhibition of these panels, and they were eventually supposed to be heat sealed or laminated, but they never got done because I'd moved on from college. And they are designed to fit in a box, so they could be transported easily, and then have been exhibited locally in Mynydbach. They were in Llangwrefon School for many years and used for educational purposes. And Mary Llwyd, who's sadly left us now, but she was the headmistress there, and she cared for them for many, many years. And then I had them back, and so that's that. I thought again it'd be quite nice to see that in the exhibition. Within the square mile then, as I said, I went around every single place and photographed the people who lived there or the people who had holiday homes there. So there was a whole series of portraits, and this is one that's the one selected for this exhibition. This is Winnie Jenkins, and the reason I've got her stating her opinion about, I can't remember what the subject was at the time, was, of course, she was quite lonely, as many of these people were. They lived alone. They really loved me calling, because I'd be there for about 2 or 3 hours chatting and then taking the photo. And she wouldn't stop talking, she would. And I said, I'm going to take the photo now. Oh, yes. And then she'd start talking again. I thought, well, okay, let's just photograph her talking. And that's how that came about. This photo then represents really, when looking forward to changes in agriculture. This is Bryn Wychell, Fferm Bryn Wychell. That's Emyr Hopkins, who was the son of a famous poet, B.T. Hopkins, and his daughter. And health and safety wasn't a big issue in those days, I don't think, as his little daughter was, they were collecting the churns and taking the sheep up. And of course, churns now are no longer used. So it's just a little cameo, and of course this is just one of hundreds of photos I have documenting the farming practice on Mynydd Bach. And then, as I said, 30 years later, I decided, although I would go back occasionally, that I would spend a period of time again documenting the changes that had happened there, occurred. And the television programme called Yr Ail Filltir, my project was documented by Catherine M.S. Davis. It probably still is in the S4C archive, but there was an hour-long programme on the project. And so this is represented here. Perhaps this is a chance for me to say as well that the exhibition really is a collaboration between myself and Ffotogallery. So Sian and Bob have been involved in selections and also in offering different ways of presenting photography. And after, I think it was Bob who suggested having that, we'll go to the other one in a minute, that large print over there. I decided, well, how about enlarging this? This background photo is a big bale. And although it's from rural sort of practice, in my mind there's something quite industrial about the shape of and the structure of these big bales that they produce these days. Quite different from the little baler that these young, you can see these are the old traditional square bales or oblong bales that are not seen very often these days. That is just part of the machinery that they used. And so this is really to mark the difference between the 76 and 77 and 2007. So if we turn around the corner, there will be a chance for questions in a minute. I'll just finish this bit here. And one of the main problems with how do you select images from 50 years, or even from a large project such as the Mynydd Bach project, for the exhibition space. And so in the end, we've just selected just a few images showing the difference. The main difference you may have noticed, of course, is when I started taking photographs, it was film, black and white film, and developed in a dark room. But then by 2007, I'd turned to using digital technology. And I went digital in 2004. So until then, until about 2000, the majority of my work is black and white film. But because I was working, one thing I haven't mentioned because I was going to leave it till then, of course, I was trained as a graphic designer. And so I've earned a living mostly as a designer of books, and also educational educational books and all kinds of stuff like that. But so these projects would be my own personal work. By working as a graphic designer, I preferred to do that. Obviously, there was a lot of photography that would feed into that graphic design work. But I preferred working on projects that I felt really strongly about them. So the income from my design work would finance the projects I was working on. But by now I was using digital technology, and the selection here decided really on, I love the architecture that you get in rural areas. That's just one example of the old sheds that you get in the Mynydd Bach area. I was quite amazed by going to the, if you go back to that one, of course, this suddenly, you can, the last picture I was talking about over there was the churns on the back of the trailer behind the tractor. Of course, churns now obsolete and are becoming garden ornaments or used for, you know, you'd see them scattered around the place. And somebody put these skulls, which seemed to me a bit symbolic about, there's a certain symbolism in that. And I was quite amazed at the colours on these sheep. Obviously I want to take a lot of photos in mats, and I just liked the colours on that. And they complain that the price they get for fleeces has gone down. Well, I'm not surprised with all those colours. They probably take a lot of cleaning. This one I will talk about because it's Bryn Rodin. Mynydd Bach is an area which is developed from little cottages called Tai Unos. This tradition that existed on common land, where if you could build a house overnight and by the morning you could light a fire and there was smoke coming through the chimney, you were allowed to live there. And also if you took an axe and threw it in each direction from the walls of that little cottage, that marked the perimeter of the land that you could grow your vegetables or whatever. So a lot of the Mynydd Bach farms, small farms, have developed from these very small cottages. And this is Bryn Rodin, that was one of the last of those cottages that was hidden in the forest. And in 2007 they were harvesting the timber, and so we just concentrated on just 3 images there of this little cottage that was completely destroyed. As I said, there were shops that closed. The petrol station has closed and been in the middle of the trees. And I'll turn into Welsh for a minute. Efo'r llun yna, mae'n atgoffa fi o geiriau Gwenallt. Planwyd egin coed y trydydd rhyfel, ar tir esger ceir a meysydd tir bach, gar hyd cymere. There's a poem by a famous Welsh poet called Gwenallt, where he describes near hyd cymere, where DJ Williams, linking again with Mynydd Bach, a filltir sgwâr. DJ is the kind of community that existed there. And Gwenallt saw the industrialization and the changes that were happening, that you can translate a bit of me. Planwyd egin coed, the saplings of the Third World War were planted on the fields of Tir Bach and Esger Caer by Rhyd Cymere. So there's a lot of symbolism in the kind of images I take, which might not resonate with some people. Although a friend of mine who came to the exhibition contacted me and said she'd enjoyed the exhibition, and those exact words came into her mind when she saw that image. So I come from a background where poetry and literature is important to me, and it's part of my DNA. You know, if you're brought up in a traditional Welsh language, cultural background, then I think a lot of these poems are in the back of our minds all the time. As photographers, there are images that are in the back of our minds all the time. So if somebody would like to ask a question, or we can move on to the next section, is there something you would like to ask me before we go on to the next section? Or, of course, you can ask me at the end, it's up to you. Everybody happy? Shall we go on? Okay. This is work that dates from the 1980s. And possibly because of my background now in graphic design and the fact that I'm always attracted to very graphic images, I found myself taking, you can come around again after I've spoken and have a look at the individual images. But wherever I would go, I would be fascinated by graffiti. And a lot of people regard graffiti as sort of vandalism. I don't, because I think it's a way of recording the life that we're living. Graffiti there seems to be an urge, isn't there, for people to just leave their mark. Sometimes it's just a kind of I was here. But graffiti can also be very creative. It can also, if we're talking about visual imagery, pictures, individual single images, how do you document political ideas and the political sort of atmosphere of a certain era or a certain age? And in my mind, photography can do that. We don't have a video like this gentleman here recording words and images together. And so I think that was part of the attraction, and I find now, many, many years later, these record ideas and people's political views, and it's surprising really how they resonate and are, sort of quite significant to this period of time, although they were taken in the 1980s. This picture I felt really strongly I wanted. This is a very recent picture. These are all from the 1980s, but this is from 2018 and taken in Brittany. Have been doing a lot of work in Brittany in recent years with a view of producing a photo book. This year I've failed to go there obviously because of this work. But next year I hope to spend some considerable time there finishing or at least developing the project. But I'm fascinated by this because very often I take photos instinctively. I don't go out specifically looking for a certain image. I'm just wandering around, and this immediately attracted my attention. And it's interesting how it goes back to the earliest photos I took in Newport in 1974, 75. So I think as photographers there are certain subjects that attract us throughout our lives, really. That is, so as I said, graffiti can be quite creative or it can be really political, as in I ain't going to work on Maggie's farm, who we see here. Politics and activism as opposed to politics. Activism has always been a constant theme in my work. And I think that is possibly because I was brought up in Aberystwyth, a university town, and was in my teenage years, it was a time that, obviously I come from a Welsh-speaking background, it was a time that the Welsh Language Society was set up, was founded. We had the investiture of the Prince of Wales, which was a very controversial event. And also Tryweryn, there was supposed to be, initially I was going to show some Tryweryn pictures in the exhibition, but because of lack of space they didn't make it to the final edit. But Tryweryn again, the drowning of the village of Cwm Celyn to provide water for Liverpool, which was never actually used, again was very controversial. So I think growing as a teenager, being aware of all these things, it made me a very politically active person. And also, as an extension of that, obviously I wanted to record those. So I've always been passionate about, I suppose in a way you could just summarise them all in peace and justice, heddwch a chyfiawnder, under that. And I've always seen the campaigns for the Welsh language or for self-determination within Wales. I've always seen those in an international context, that they're part of a worldwide attempt by people who wish to create a better world. If we're talking about photography, possibly one of my influences was Philip Jones-Griffiths. Philip Jones-Griffiths taking photos in his famous book of Vietnam Ink that was actually did change people's attitudes to the war in Vietnam in the USA. He always talked about Tryweryn, that it was in the back of his mind wherever he was photographing. He always regarded himself as a Welshman that was seeing the world through the eyes of a Welsh person, and that's what I believe I do as well. But I've always, it's not just about inward looking, and obviously we have our own concerns here in Wales, but I'm always outward looking as well. So these campaigns are not just about our lives, but the lives of people in South Africa or Gaza or Ukraine. So these are, again, original prints that were in an exhibition back in 1992, which I've still kept, and they haven't been seen since then. So they've been brought out for this exhibition. And I'm not going to talk about every single image. You can ask me afterwards if you want to ask me a question. It was Bob who did a lot of the hanging here. He put these two pictures together. And when we talk about exhibitions, it's not just about individual images, but how do you present that work? These two work really well together, I think, where we have Dafydd Iwan here, who's having a revival these days and playing in, singing in football matches and what have you. But this is the young Dafydd Iwan singing a song called Hawl I Fyw, The Right to Live, with a background of an anti-apartheid banner that was created by the artist Anthony Evans, again, an artist who lives locally and is a popular Welsh artist. And then we have at the end, when I'm photographing in a protest, I will try to arrive early and I will always leave late. Because what I find very often, that the images before the protest starts and the remainder, what's remaining at the end, is just as interesting as what is happening during the protest. And this was in Cathays at the end, outside the museum, at the end of the protest that had been the huge rally in 1986 in Sophia Gardens. And this gentleman was just waiting for somebody with this banner, "The struggle is my life." And I think they work quite well together. And that's it, there we are. Just one little word about this image as well. How, when you present work in an exhibition, I really wanted this as quite a large scale. It was only the other day how presenting work in different formats influences the way we see it. It works quite well like this, but the other day I was sitting on the other end by the video booth and looking at it from a distance, and it becomes a totally different picture. And I find that it's only in an exhibition that you get that opportunity of seeing images in a different way. No, sorry, I moved that. Again, I'm not sure that I'll talk about individual images here because, you know, it's going to take too much time. But these, again, are from the same period. This is one that I think this is possibly one of the images that has been mostly reproduced mostly during my career, really. It has made quite a few appearances. And this was in Greenham Common or in Aldermaston. And in those days, painting faces wasn't actually a very popular thing. These days it's quite common to see people painting their faces. But it was quite a new thing in that time. And really what I'm doing here is documenting people's commitment to causes. And I'm always interested in the slogans that they use and some of the clever use of words. And there we are. I won't talk much. I'll just talk vaguely. We can't all go in here. Because of the gallery space, it's impossible to show everything as prints. And so I made the decision in the end then that the black and white work, it's very difficult showing black and white and colour together Because if you've got very powerful, one reason why I like black and white is there's something about the power of that contrast in, and I think because we don't obviously see in black and white, it's easier to emphasize different aspects of what you're seeing by turning them into black and white. These, because they're so powerful in their presence, having colour photos together with them, it doesn't always work. And so the decision was taken that the recent work, there's a lot of recent protest work here. Yeah, and these are quite contemporary. There's photos I've taken this year. It's very difficult for me to talk about without seeing, obviously, if you can't see the pictures. So I leave those for the time being, but have a look at them, and if somebody has a question about them, then just come and grab me.
Can I ask you, the story behind the picture?
Oh, this one, yes, I will explain that. This was taken in 1990, I'm hopeless with dates, 1996 was it, when the Queen came to visit Aberystwyth. And obviously again, there was still, she was invited to open, I think, one of the departments of the new building on the university campus. And some people felt strongly, why do we have the Queen coming to open this? You know, sort of, this is the University of Wales, and do we have to have the Queen coming? But so there was a protest anyway with the students up on the campus. And she actually turned back. It's the only time that she had to turn back. I think she did return later. But there was an event then in the Cooper's Arms. I've taken a whole lot of photos in the Coops, as we called it, or we still call it, which is a cultural hub really in Aberystwyth for gigs and political meetings. And during that day then, a whole day they decided to have their own celebration, and this is the Queen of the Coops. And sadly, the gentleman has died, I think. I need now. He was obviously, but anyway. So that's the background to that picture, and of course it's a very contemporary image now, really, with gender identity and so it's strange how 30 years later that it resonates with a lot of people.
Photography.
You're right, yes, yeah. So I think it is a wonderful medium that we're working with. I think we're very privileged to be able to do this work. Right, we're going to a completely different subject matter now. No, we'll start on these three pictures here because it will lead on to the chapel period. I'll just grab a bit of water. How are we doing for time?
Well, 2:05.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we're on time, I think. Although if you're tired, you're welcome to leave if I'm talking too much. Oh yes, yeah. If people want to grab a chair, because we're going to be, and there's some seats there. And would you like a chair? Come on, we'll find you a chair. Okay. Yeah, that's it. And we could just move the chair around. It'll be fine. I was going through a process of I don't very often turn the camera on myself. I don't take selfies. You won't see them on Facebook. But I decided, I think the background is that it was a period of time where I'd lost a lot of relatives and people who were close to me. And that made me think about my inheritance and what those people had given me. And in a way, some of the work is quite emotional. If we start with this one then, because this has never been shown in this format before. It was Ffotogallery who decided on this version. This was really just a work print. But I have in recent years combined words and images. But as a child, I didn't have a grandmother because both had died before I was born. But I'm living in Blaenplwyf, and where my grandmother, not the exact house, but where my grandmother, where my father was brought up. And as I said previously, he was a keen amateur photographer. And so I'm very much aware that I belong to a certain culture, a certain background. Land is very important to us, not as something that's worth a lot of money per acre or whatever. Currently now there's a huge controversy with family farms under threat because of the changes in inheritance laws. I currently live, the 3 fields behind my house are the fields that my grandmother, she lost her husband when she was quite young and brought up my father alone. And she had a little small holding. And the 3 fields behind my house were, I'm very much aware that when I'm walking on those fields, I'm walking on the same path that she took, and seeing the same, although trees have grown, that connection. So what I did here was I found my father, well, I knew about it anyway. This is a photo that was taken by my father of his mother. And I went to the exact spot in Cai Bach, where he took that photo. And took the photo in my hand and held the camera with one hand and recorded that image. The words, "Bu mam gi farw cyn fy ngeni, chydias i erioed yn ei llaw, cydiaf yma mewn un o luniau fy nhad ohoni yn yr union fan lle safai." My grandmother died before I was born. I never held her hand. I'm holding here in one of the pictures that my father took of her in the exact spot where it was taken. And it's an image that resonates with a lot of people, and it's, in a way, it makes the connection with the most basic elemental capacity that photography has, really, to transfer memories from one generation to another. So that's the background. The project then that became a little bit more technical was where I visited the farms that members of my family had lived and worked the land. We have a whole collection of carte visite. This is a carte visite photo of the 3 brothers, my grandfather and 2 of his brothers. I'm working, it's the only time that I've really gone away from, I still consider them documentary images, but they're not digital. What I would do, I would put a film in the camera, and I would take these old photos with me, and then I photograph the photos of the people who lived in that particular farm. I took a frame, wound the film back, and then would sort of document something like a wall or a part of a building, or in this case a door, the doorway of the old farm. I didn't want the control of digital. You can manipulate images quite easily and fuse them these days, but I didn't want that control. I just wanted to, because it was really how I wanted to mimic the way the memory works, where we can't control it, you know, you'll see something and it triggers something in the memory. So that was the idea behind it. So there's a whole series of these. This is one area that has actually been condensed to 3 images, whereas in the first edit I had in my mind it was going to be a far more comprehensive selection. But it works well. But this one then will lead to the next one, where this is a photo I took of the Sunday school in Blaenplwyf Chapel, which is my local chapel in the village, in 1920, I think it was 1920. Again, I photographed that old photograph of, can you see how, it's only a small village, but you can see how many people were shows the importance of chapels in that time, the number of people in the chapel. And then the film went back 1 frame, and I photographed the empty chapel And the only clue that it's a contemporary one is there's a little sign there for safety, fire safety. And again, there's a kind of fusion of images there, but without the control, it just happened that way. So that just shows really my background. I was brought up in a home where the chapel was very important in terms of social life, and also on the Sunday, a very busy day. My grandfather lived with us, and he would go to a chapel in Aberystwyth, and my parents went to the chapel in Blaenplwyf, so I had 3 services every Sunday, which I wasn't always happy about, but it just showed that's the kind of background I come from. So obviously when we come to this current period of time, when I've taken a lot of photos in chapels. In the Mynydd Bach area, I would document services. I've photographed funerals, some famous people, or just, people who are really important. That's a very difficult thing, but I would do it in a sensitive way. And also baptisms I've photographed. The one thing I haven't photographed is weddings. Always kept away from weddings. I did not want to document weddings, although I have obviously some images from family weddings. But what I'm concentrating these days is documenting the chapels as they become sold. Especially in Ceredigion at the moment, many chapels are closing because the changes in people now, formal religion, the decline in formal religion. And so very often I'll look at the local newspaper or whatever and see if there is a chapel is closing. And we'll go and photograph it before it's actually auctioned or sold. And not only documenting the chapel, but also I'm fascinated by the objects that get left behind, because they're part of the history of the chapel. But this is, again, this item is important because my grandfather was a carpenter, and he made this board for Silo Chapel in Aberystwyth, which closed many years ago now because it was unsafe, the foundations were unsafe. And it ended up then in our chapel in Blaenplwyf, which has recently closed. So I asked, could I have it, please? Which had some strange looks from some people. I said, oh, yes, you take it. And what's wonderful about it is the way that I work with exhibitions very often, or if I'm producing prints, is I'll print 7x5 prints, and they fit perfectly. It's actually quite wonderful. So I've been playing around, and this has been my studio for months, and I would change them around. So they're of mostly of Ceredigion chapels, but also I'm interested in the way chapels are now being used for other purposes. Like this is a drama presentation, these two images here. That's the chapel that was used in a television series. They're used for location purposes. And I'm always fascinated, again, we're going back to the graffiti. This is people obviously bored during the sermon and started scratching with coins or whatever. Again, this urge that people have to leave their mark on somewhere.
Were those numbers referring to any specific hymns?
No, if I'm honest, what I did, I went through all the pile of numbers I had, and I went for the ones that showed they were really quite mouldy. And but although I have looked up afterwards, and fun, yes, so no, there wasn't any particular. I might look for some in the future, but and as part. Because I'm doing a lot of work on chapels, I actually I received the invitation, by competition, to become an artist in residence in Llandudno. Capella Tabernacle in Llandudno was closed, and I had a specific brief as a photographer and an artist to document items that have been left behind in the chapel and to document the chapel as well. And so these lovely ladies that I invited them to come along, and I asked them to select specific items within the chapel that they could see in front of them, select something that had some significance to them or they were happy to be holding whilst I photographed them. And the first, they were a bit shy to begin with, but then they thought it was great fun. And the first lady chose what is we would probably expect somebody to, her hymn book. There was no, well, it wasn't hers, it was a hymn book, so she chose a hymn book. And then another lady came along and said, well, I've been forever boiling kettles and making tea, so I'll grab this kettle. And then another one said, well, I'm serving the tea usually when we have tea. When we had events in the chapel, I would usually be at the end of the table serving tea, so I'll choose the teapot. And another one said, well, I was always washing up, so I'll get this dishcloth. And the lady then, she would be the one that I've got their names recorded, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Then the lady in pink was the lady who would always present the chapel with flower presentations and flower arrangements. And so she picked up a jug and put her flowers in them. And after having taken the photos, I said, always got poetry in the back of my mind because of that background. It reminded me straight away of Menna Elfyn, who we are privileged to have here today. The poet Menna Elfyn has got a wonderful poem that I'm going to ask her to read. It's obviously written in Welsh originally, but it has a translation as well, I think. So would you be happy to come here and read us the poem?
Let's take that microphone off you. Is that okay? Thanks.
Well, how could I get those? Okay.
So did bach fanna. Dy bach i'r ochr yma.
Hello?
Na ni, lovely.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
How could I refuse Marian Delyth? And I said I was coming anyway.
And Menna's come from Carmarthen in this weather, so...
I want to just
Yes, I think that does so.
I want to show you, Marian Delyth has done most of the covers of I published quite a few poetry books, but Marian Delyth's done most of the covers of my books. And this is my favourite, this one, where she does have various, I think there's one there with Van der Bomb on her face.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I thought it was me. Anyway. How can I refuse? And glad to be here. Thanks you for illuminating what has been a wonderful, wonderful career out in all weathers, in all protests, in all ways. Diolch yn fawr I ti. I'm going to read you Welsh first of all. I had thought this poem had gone to history in these last few weeks. I think it's still perhaps quite relevant. Knife y gwragedd ar y sylw. First of all, I should have better glasses on. And I don't usually read in a coat. And in chapel we keep our coats on. So it's quite... Knife y gwragedd ar y sylw. Oed na, corrannau ohonom yn wynebu rhes o flaenoriaid moel feddylgau. Beth y gwr o'i byrbyd diolch i'r gwragedd i'n gweini. Ie, gweini ger y bedd, wylod y groes ac yn waith y gwragedd. Aros yr ôl. Ar ôl y bion. Yn dal i aros a gweini a bod yn byd. Boed hi'n 2,000 o flynyddoedd neu boed hi'n ddoi. Ond pa wedyn unwaith eto o'r sel sy'n rhy fawr I ferched. Naeth y merched aros yr ôl. Beth am ddweud gyda'n gilydd? Ei lafarganu'n sal newydd, neu ei adrodd fel y bwc. Randewch chi feistri bach. Tos ei Crist yn dod nôl heddi, bys fe'n bendant yn gwneud I de ei hun. Let the lady stay behind, please. A service. Us in the sheepfold, the deacons ranked, facing us, bald, thoughtful. Him in the pulpit says, thanks to the women who served. yes, served at the grave, wept by the cross. And with the ladies, the women, please stay behind. Behind. We're still behind, still waiting, serving, smiling, still done. The same 2,000 years ago as today. But the next time they say it, from the seat too big for women, will the ladies, etc., what about singing out all together now, in a chant, a new psalm, a lesson being recited? Listen here, little masters, if Christ came back today, he'd definitely be making his own cup of tea.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Menna. Dwi wrth y modd bod ti wedi dod yma heddi. And many thanks to Menna. I'm so thrilled that she was able to come here today and through this awful weather as well. And she's a constant inspiration to many of us who read her poetry and has done such a wonderful contribution through her literature and her poetry throughout the years. And yes, so now this is the largest print I've ever done. And it's thanks to Bob and Shan that I was persuaded to do it, really, because I said, yes, it would look wonderful, wouldn't it? But, oh, I don't know, I don't think I'll risk printing it. Because if you notice on the board there, on the top photo on the right-hand side there, you can see this image in a very small scale. So you can see the scale of the actual item. But anyway, so really it's about developing all the time. At 70 years of age, I'm still excited by things like this. And I'm so glad that people who are slightly younger than myself are persuading me to stretch myself and to... I've always liked exploring ways of presenting images. And thank you, Bob, especially for pasting it all. If I need my house wallpapered, I think I know where to come now. But so the background image then, and then these, they're not all from Llandudno. Again, this is a Bible from Llandudno. Distawrwydd means silence, and that was on the lobby or the place, the entrance to the chapel. And this is from a series where I spent a whole day just letting the images be influenced by the light that was coming in through the windows of the chapel. And so during the day, the light would change from one place to the other. And it's not by flash or anything, it's just natural lighting. And I'm quite fascinated, really, in churches and chapels by the way that natural light will suddenly focus your attention on one little bit of one feature within the chapel. And again, this is again, as I said, I'm fascinated by these, the way that people have throughout the years, how many generations of people have been in that pew sort of making little marks. And this again, somebody approached me thinking it was a double exposed image. It isn't. As I said, I take this as a documentary image. What we have here is I've got a whole series of these. This is Capel Bethel Trefenter. And I like this idea of looking in through windows, finding little, there's one on that panel there as well, these little hints of chapels. And so this, you've got the graveyard in the background there. This is on a winter's day using a long lens and looking through the chapel window through one pane, and you're going into the inside of the chapel and then seeing the window on the other side of the chapel, and this combination of the landscape and the kind of atmospheric image. So there we are. So that's the end of chapel. Does somebody want to ask a question now, or shall we leave the questions till the end? Well, how are we for time? Oh, sir. Oh, 5 minutes. Right, okay. We've got another session in 5 minutes time. I'm going to be here, though. Just quickly, the book, when I've worked with books throughout my life, but in this case, the book, I was a frequent visitor to Ynys or Bardsey Island. And anyway, for many, many years, it was my escape from work. It was wonderful. A few years ago, by now there is internet connection there. But many years ago, when I was working, it was my escape. Once I was on that boat to Bardsey Island, which is just off the Llŷn Peninsula, nobody could get in touch with me. Yeah, there was hardly a mobile phone signal. Well, there weren't any mobile phones when I started going there, and there was hardly a signal there. So it was wonderful. For a whole week, nobody could get hold of me. So any deadline would go to the background. And so after I collated a selection of the images and wrote some of the text as well. And the book, it's only in Welsh. The part of me thinks it should be translated really, or we should do another version in the English language as well. But the book Enlli tu hwn tir Sunt was published by Gwasgarau Gwalch, and I think there are some copies still for sale. But it's my response to the island really. I haven't got a huge amount of time to talk about it today, but it's if you haven't visited the island, then I do recommend that you go up to the Llŷn Peninsula. And the reason that it's so remote is that although it's not far from the mainland, it can be quite a treacherous crossing. And so very often the island is inaccessible. And there's something wonderful about somewhere that's so near, you can see it, but you can't actually visit it. But I will talk about the one right on the end there, because I'm wondering, again, it's documentation. How many places in the world now where you have to, with transhumans, that you need to have a boat to transport animals from one place to the other? There aren't many places, I would imagine, and certainly not in around the UK. And there's a bird observatory there where they ring birds. So that was the one. And the family who farm there, it's easier to walk across the fields after haymaking than it is to go to take a buggy along the very rocky little lane that goes up to the village, to the top of the island. And there's a very, very male-orientated washing line because it's from the lighthouse. And of course, the lighthouse people are always male, and so I couldn't resist the temptation of, because of the shapes really, but it's just little things like the colours and it's a beautiful place. So I think just to end, I'll just, there isn't a lot on books here, but as I said, I earned my living mostly in my working with books. I love books. So as Menna is here, this is one of, it's only a little book and it's in black and white, but this is one of the books that I'm most proud of. I really love this book. And it's the poems of Iwan Llwyd, who has sadly died. But I love his poetry anyway. And he's a very visual poet. He's got, really, you don't need to combine it. He was very interested in working with artists and visual artists, but his work really has such wonderful imagery that it doesn't really need visual imagery with it. But when I'm working with poets and interpreting their work in visual, by visual means, I don't try to have a literal interpretation, but I try to create images that by fusing the visual image and the words, that you create an extra dimension of meaning, or that you extend the ideas that the poet has. Felly, coffa da amdano, Iwan Llwyd. Okay, I just mentioned this just quickly. This was an image where I've edited a book, and it's a very early book, 1980s, and Paul Cubbotts has described it as one of the early, I think if not the earliest, compilation of photographs of Wales that was not about landscapes or about a romantic ideal, but really about the use of the camera to document the country that we live in and various aspects of it, and in a fresh way really, and that really is what I've done throughout my life and still continuing to do, is documenting the life of Wales, the culture of Wales, the people of Wales, whom I love. And I'll end on that, with those words then. One thing I did forget to say, there's a couple there of commissioned works. All this work here is not, apart from the artist in residence, it's not commissioned work. It's work I've done from my commitment and my, yes. Yeah, I think I've talked enough now. As I said, I'm here around. I've got a little talk to do now, but if you're welcome to ask me questions, please do. And just enjoy the exhibition again if you haven't had the chance to see it.
Well done.
Yeah, yeah.